Hello, and thank you so much for inviting me to join you this afternoon and to talk about specifications grading. I'm going to get my slides up, and while I do, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. Hopefully you can see my slides now. I am a professor who teaches courses on instructional design. And what that means is that I love to continuously tinker around with instructional design in the classes that I teach and oversee. At the moment, the program that I teach in is a graduate level program only, but I have taught at the undergraduate level as well. And I also oversee instructors who are teaching at the undergraduate level right now. And that's relevant in the context of what I'm going to talk about today, because I have experience working with students at all levels. What I'm going to share with you today is the journey that I've been on over the last maybe 5 years or so, gradually converting many courses over to use a specifications grading approach. And I'll tell you about the things that we've done that have worked, the things that maybe we're still trying to figure out and do better, and give some ideas about how this could be implemented. Along the way, by the way, please feel free to use the chat to drop in questions and thoughts as they come up, and share your experiences with each other. I usually do a pretty good job of paying attention to what's happening in the chat at the same time as while I'm presenting, but and responding to some of those questions. But if I miss anything, we can come back to it at the Q&A in the end. I also received some questions in advance, and some of them were already in the presentation that I had planned, and I managed to work in one or two more. But again, any other questions we can continue with at the end. I'm going to first talk a little bit about specs grading. From the questions that came in advance, it seemed that some people weren't familiar with the idea at all. And some people had some really targeted questions, which told me that they had already been thinking about this topic. So I hope I've got a little bit of something here for everyone. We'll talk about what it is. So if you have no idea at all, you'll get a sense of that. I'm going to present a brief evaluation study that we did on one of the classes we've used specs in, and then talk a little bit about designing a specs system, because if it's something that appeals to you, figuring out exactly how to make this work will be something that's quite important. But I want to start by just thinking about grading. And please type in the chat, tell me, what do your students complain about the most with grading? Because we know that students complain about grading. When I taught undergraduate students, I would get students complaining about there not being enough extra chances, and they wanted extra credit for everything. I see in the chat things about unclear recommendations, vague grading guidelines, turnaround times, clarification needed, hard grader. What does that mean, right? That there's a hard grader. I see Edward doesn't get complaints. You are a lucky one if you are not getting complaints. You must be doing it right. But grading is challenging. Students don't always like the outcomes of it, don't always like the way that it's done. And as faculty, we have our own complaints. So now let's flip this around. What are your gripes about grading when you have to do it? Because you may dislike some of the same things as the students, but go ahead and type some of those things in the chat for me. So Edward, you said before you didn't get complaints, but now you're telling me that you have really, really complicated rubrics. So you have a lot of specifications, and that helps, but it probably makes it a lot for you to, I know for me, if I have a rubric and I've got a zillion little things to check off in there for the students, I can find that a little bit frustrating. It does take a lot of time sometimes to give feedback to everybody, yet we know that the feedback should be important. Rima, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, taking attention away from learning. That has often been a concern of mine too, that everybody gets so fixated on the grade that they forget about the learning that's supposed to be happening. My own personal grading gripes are first, there's the assignment that makes you go, Y'all know about that assignment?
are under an
That's the
instructional.
one that when you're grading that assignment, you spend way too much time on it because you look at it and you're like, wow, this totally isn't what I was expecting. It doesn't look anything like what I asked for. They did a little of this, a little of that, none of that. There's this whole other thing that I didn't even ask for. It actually looks like it's pretty decently done. Where did that come from? And I just go, over it. And then I would wonder, oh, how many points for this? How many points for that? At some point, I started to think, did I just spend more time looking at this assignment, pondering it, perhaps even walking away from it because it made my head hurt than the student spent creating it and submitting it? Those assignments would really bother me. That was something I didn't like about grading. And yes, Savannah, you want to give them constructive criticism that will help them improve. Sometimes you don't know where to begin. You want to say, well, did you look at the assignment? Go back to the assignment again. Students don't, if I can sort of paraphrase what I'm seeing in Edward's comment in the chat, students sometimes don't know where to put the relative emphasis of their efforts or energy, what's going to be important. I think sometimes if they run out of time, there's that approach of, throwing spaghetti at the wall, seeing what sticks and hoping for the best. My other big grading gripe has always been time. It takes me a lot of time, and I factor in not just the time that it takes me to actually sit there and look at everything and provide a grade for it, but the time that I spend what I call procrastinating, avoiding getting around to the grading, or that I walk away to get yet another cup of tea because I can't deal with it. There would be that feeling at some point that I had to be giving feedback that justified the grade, right? I had to justify every point that was taken off because I had this feeling that it could come back to me again. And even with what I thought were pretty clear assignment expectations. And so those were challenges for me. And since I've shifted to specifications grading, I feel like those weights have largely been lifted for me. So I'll tell you more about this approach now and how it has helped in this way. And it's helped the students too, which you'll see when I talk about the evaluation we did of a system. So if you're totally unfamiliar with specifications grading, this is competency based, it's criterion referenced. It's focused on mastery learning. Shortcut is specs. There's a book by Linda Nielsen, which is a great book. I knew all of this stuff already as an instructional designer about competency-based and criterion reference systems. But I was part of a reading group, I don't know when it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And we were reading this book, and it gave me a moment to pause and think about, what do I actually do in my own classes? And I realized that for grading, I was following general best practices and doing the kinds of things that I saw everybody else around me doing. And the book made me question my grading systems. And I started to play with them. It made me think, okay, I could do this. I could have assignments that are graded on a pass-fail basis if I wanted to do that. That could maybe make things easier. Now, that then has to do with whether students have fully met the competencies or not fully met them, or met them to a threshold, if I give a threshold on it. Then I felt the need that I had to articulate to students, though, that meeting the competencies does not mean you're perfect. I have seen students do that before, where they said, whoa, I got an A in that course, therefore I am now an expert. And I want to say, well, gosh, I've had a PhD for 20 years and counting, and I still don't feel like I'm an expert in anything. I'm learning more every single day. So I do like to remind people that, but also focusing on competencies helps people think concretely about what they can do and what they can't do. And it removes some of that sense of I'm an expert or I'm the best at this, and rather makes us think about our actual skills. And then the final grade in a course corresponds to what competencies a student has been able to demonstrate, or the portion of them that they've been able to demonstrate in a course. And as I go through the presentation, there will be various examples that are coming up of how we could get to a final grade. There is no one way to do this. And I want to stress that. It's all about getting creative with your course, thinking about what's really important, and then providing clarity for the students about what those expectations are and how we're going to get to that path. So if you use specifications grading, you should have good alignment between your assessments and the learning outcomes. Now, ideally, you would have had that already, but in practice, there are lots of examples where that hasn't been the case. The expectations should be really clear for students. And sometimes I remember back to when I was an undergraduate and the directions that we would get for assignments. It might be things like write a 7-page paper on this topic, be sure to use references. Like, wow, that was so general. Like, and yet we did it. And I so clearly remember a conversation with a TA one day where I had a paper and I really wasn't grade grubbing, but I thought I had done a good job on the paper and I got a B+. And I was curious, like what would take the paper to the next level? And I was asking my TA and she couldn't tell me. She just kept saying, it's a B+ paper. And I wanted to know why. And to me, that taps into the heart of specifications, is that students want to understand what you are looking for. Well, that's true whether you're using this kind of a system or not. But if you shift to specs, it's really going to push you to have to be super clear about your expectations up front. Remember a minute ago when I said the frustration of feeling like you have to give students feedback that justifies all of the little point deductions that you've taken? Well, if the expectations are clear up front, you shouldn't be in that situation of feeling like you have to justify yourself as the instructor. And the students should also feel like they've got more control because they know exactly what they need to do. As long as they've read through the specifications, they know. And if they look at something and it doesn't make sense before they've submitted the assignment, then that's an area they need to work on still, and they can ask the instructor about that. And for an instructor, it should simplify the grading process because you've told the students exactly what you're looking for, you know exactly what you're looking for, and you can make that assessment of they did it or they didn't do it. Now, it gets more complicated than that. There's a path that we follow, like what happens if they don't do it, and I will be getting to that along the way. The very simplified version of this then is that the assignment descriptions are as clear as they can be about what specifications the students need to meet. And if you do something where you have varied levels, you articulate the levels of it. So it could be like pass, fail, you do it or you don't, or there could be gradations in there. I have classes that have a pass and a high pass. Or I have versions of assignments. I'll call one the concept assignment, that's like the pass, and the full version, which is the high pass. And then students will follow the specifications that are given to them. And then grading, you check that off. You leave them feedback too, of course, but then the feedback isn't about justifying the grade. The feedback is about engaging intellectually with what the student did, which to me is the most wonderful way to be engaging with students over feedback. And this little flow chart should help get a little bit more in detail about the way this works. So if a student submits the assignment, it immediately goes into triage. You take a look at the assignment and you're able to say, did it meet the specifications? Yes or no? Let's assume it did. That's going to take us down the happy green path. So if the specs are met, then I check it off in the grade book as complete. The student gets the points. Then I leave comments. But they're really fun comments for me to leave because, again, now I'm not justifying myself. I'm not telling them I took points off for this or that. And I see Edward saying, what am I counting as an assignment? Whatever, could be anything in the class. Doesn't really matter. And then I return it to the student. My students have told me that they like to go get the feedback then, and it just makes them think more about what they're doing, what they're learning in the general sense. They're not fixated on how did I miss points. So it's a real orientation shifter. But let's say that the specs aren't met, and I see that right away. Then I return it to the student. And the student has a choice then. And they can revise the assignment, or they could not revise the assignment. If they don't revise the assignment, then their grade's going to be a 0 for it, like they didn't submit an assignment. If they choose to revise it, then they revise it and they submit it with a token. I'll talk more about tokens in a minute. So there are ways of giving students second chances. This doesn't have to be as high stakes of a system as it sounds. And then they come back and they go through the whole grading cycle again. And yes, Amanda, complete assumes that there are no revisions that are needed. This doesn't mean that it's the most perfect thing you've ever seen in the world. It means that they've met the specifications. I think that in many ways, this is much more authentic when we think about real world performance that we engage in, because, I submit an article to a journal and I don't get a grade on it, right? It can get accepted or rejected, or the thing in the middle, which is I'm asked to revise it and to work towards something that is considered acceptable. I don't actually have anything in here to talk about the ungrading process, but it is tapping into some of the same philosophies of learning here. It really takes that focus off of what number did you give me and how many points did you take off, and it reorients to what am I learning about, what knowledge and skills am I developing, and how am I demonstrating that to you. So if you're thinking about whether or not you're ready for this, you think about the kinds of rubrics that you have to begin with. And if your rubrics are really general, like the example on the right, or if you don't have any at all and you really are just sort of going at it in a freestyle manner, then you'll have more work to do to convert a course to specs. The closer you are to clearly articulated rubrics or assignment requirements, whatever you call it, it doesn't actually literally have to be a rubric, but the closer you are with that right now, the easier it is to shift to a spec system. And Jennifer, whereas the students can be evaluating themselves and ungrading, I would say that in a spec system, they do tend to evaluate themselves before they submit it to the instructor, because they are checking it off against the specs for themselves. They know when they've submitted an assignment whether or not they're meeting the specs. And you love that. I love that too. It's so empowering for students. It's such a confidence builder. And then also to know that if there's a little wobble, it's going to be okay. It's not the end of the world for their grade. But when they feel that sense of control over it, again, we stop worrying about the grade and we start thinking about the knowledge and skills that we're developing in a course. So this brings me to the idea of tokens. Within this system, we give students tokens, and you can designate tokens for whatever you want. And then students can submit their tokens to you to request certain things. Some of the ones that I use are to revise or redo them, or if they want to submit assignments late. So like, do you get those emails? Like, can I have an extra day? Can I have an extra 2 days? If your assignments are due at 11:59 p.m., then you find that students will email you at 10:30, and hopefully you're not working then, but then they're stressed out, right? They emailed you an hour and a half before it's due and it's nighttime, and you haven't told them if it's okay, if it's late or not. And so they're stressed out. In this system, they can just say, if I need to use a token, I'm going to use a token. And they've got control over that. And you can set it up and say, 3 days late or whatever matters to you. I am talking about digital tokens, so they don't exist in the world. You create them, and I haven't seen them built into an actual LMS, but I am going to show you later how we do it, because we figured out our own way of making the token system work. So right now I'm talking about the conceptual part, and I'll talk about the mechanical part of it. For me, it's in the Canvas LMS, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. We've also used tokens to allow them to, drop low grades of tiny things like a discussion assignment here or there, or perhaps to waive little participation type assignments. Like if you do some graded in-class assignments, the undergrad class I oversee has graded in-class assignments, and then the expectation is that you attend class and then you're there and you do it and you get the point. But if you don't attend class, then you didn't do it, and then they all want to make it up. Well, they can use a token for that. It's kind of like excusing their absence with a token, but that way we don't have to really play the attendance game with them. And if they miss the graded in-class assignment because they weren't there that day, then they can just submit the token for it. So some of my experiences, I started with the master's class. And this is a class that has assignments in it. I'd been teaching the class for years, and it has assignments in it that are require you to go out into the world and have some experiences. So you're taking the concepts that we're learning and then trying to see them happening out in the world, and you're mapping the theories onto the real world and writing it all up at the end. So it requires a little bit of prolonged engagement. It's one of those things that when your instructor says, start it now, 2 weeks before it's due. Yeah, I meant start it now, 2 weeks before it's due, because you can't do this by trying to cram it all in the night before it's due. It just doesn't work. And you can't have the depth of observation, insight, et cetera, that was expected. So what I started to do was to create alternate versions of the assignments. What was happening was I was getting some of those assignments from the students who really didn't have time to do them. And I thought, well, what would happen if I gave them an option that still met the same learning objectives, but at a lower level? And I gave them a lower grade from it, but I told them up front what that was going to be. So I created alternate versions of the assignments. Again, I'm hitting all of the course objectives, or all of the learning objectives related to that assignment, just not at a greater depth level. And saying to master's class, you can get a B for the assignment instead of an A. I tried it. I wondered if anybody would take me up on it, and they did. The students who were busy or less interested in that assignment, they said they liked the choice, and they self-selected into doing that essentially B-level assignment. And wow, I mean, I got some of the best B-level work you've ever seen. Then we shifted to an undergraduate class. I say we here because I'm working with the whole team. I wasn't ever teaching the class myself. And we wanted to streamline grading. The class has a lot of moving parts, a lot of assignments to grade. And as we had the comment earlier, sometimes students don't understand what to focus on when they're doing an assignment. And so we wanted to focus them on the important things. And then I decided to test this out in a doctoral seminar. And this was a class where I needed my students to be writing small papers continuously in the class. And I'm giving them feedback on their writing along the way. They're all at different starting points. I want to see how they develop as writers, but there's so much stress attached to that. And by saying, this is pass fail, you submit me a writing assignment, allow me to give you some feedback on it, I was able to remove the stress from them and just encourage the writing process. And that was the goal. So that in undergraduate course I was talking about, this is just an overview of all of the assignments for this class. And you can see that we made some decisions to grade several of them pass fail. Some have a high pass or a pass or a fail. It depends on how big of an assignment it is and whether or not there are differential levels of knowledge and skills to demonstrate in them. The skill checks on there are like little quizzes, if you will, little tests that they would do. And we set it as an 80% threshold to get a passing score, kind of like when you take the written test for driving. And then the final project is actually graded out of points. So it's just all the little stuff leading up to there that's graded on this pass-fail basis, or the high pass-fail. And yes, this helps students determine how they're going to spend their time, what their goals are. It lowers the stress level for a lot of them. And this is what it looks like when we give them specs. And there's a whole assignment description that goes along with this that I'm not going to try to cram onto a single slide. But this is an undergrad class, and we equate the passes with about a C, a high pass with an A, that's full points. And so they have to do everything for a pass and additional things, or meet additional specifications or criteria in order to get the high pass. And yeah, I don't really use the letter grades in this. We will go with the points and talk a little bit about the grade book in a bit. I've got a bit of an example and some ideas to talk about that toward the end of the presentation today. But I want you to just get the concept of it right now. And, so students were aiming for the high pass and they missed a thing or two, they can go back and revise that for the high pass at that point. And you can tell what they were doing. You can ask them when they submit it to tell you, this is I'm trying for a pass or a high pass, but, it's usually pretty well sorted out. And then, there are points associated with this, so you can add it all up to get to your final grade. That's pretty easy. It does take some time, again, up front of sitting there, imagining the different scenarios, adding up points here and there, figuring out if they did this, this, and this, it'll give a final grade of this. Is this what I think it should look like? And I'll tell you, I think that the final grades are better now than they were before, because in the past, I would spend so much time worrying over a deduction of half of a point or a point on an individual assignment, and it made no difference whatsoever on the students' final grades. And I wondered, why did I spend so much time doing that? And yet the next term, I would be in that exact same cycle again. So we evaluated this in the undergrad class, and we surveyed 27 students who were in the class to see what they thought about this. We also talked through the system with all of the instructors, and I'm just going to share some snapshots of this with you right now. We were curious how easy it was for the students to adjust to the system, and almost all of them said that it was a new system for them, and there were some who said it was hard for them to adjust. They struggled, some of them, with not being able to negotiate grades, with not having extra credit in a class, that they actually had to read the full assignment and pay attention. But I don't think that's a bad thing, to develop that skill and learn that it's important to read the full assignment. By the end of the term, we only had 2 students who said they still weren't getting it. Most of them felt it was fair. The ones who didn't feel it was fair, if you looked at those surveys, they were talking about still wanting to be able to negotiate grades or to get fractions of points and things like that. We asked them outright about whether or not they were, getting the grades that they wanted. And, again, most of them said, I got this. They were getting the control. They liked the tokens. The tokens, again, made them feel in control of things, not having to beg for forgiveness from an instructor. I think somebody put a comment in earlier about first-gen students, and I do think this is really important for first-gen students to show them where the control is, because those may be the students who don't realize they can go talk to the instructor if they're running into trouble or running late and they need a little bit of extra help along the way. We did have some students who said they were worried about their grades, but we didn't have a lot of clarity as to why they were worried about their grades. So I can't really unpack that a little bit any more than that. We asked them about the instructor feedback that they received, and they all said that they got thorough instructor feedback. They were aware of that. And only 3 of them said that they were ignoring the feedback. If they didn't need to revise it. Obviously, if they needed to revise it, they paid attention to feedback that they were getting. And if they liked it, they did like it. Only 1 person said they didn't want to take another course with this system. And again, 2 said that they preferred the partial grades. And if you were following the numbers all along on this, we had 3 students who were like, this wasn't exactly my thing. But the majority of the class here said, yes, this was good for me. We got some pretty good open-ended feedback from them as well. We've got the student who says that they got the chance to use tokens for late assignments and it wasn't a hassle like it could be in other classes. The student who said they liked having the clarity of fail, pass, and high pass. And I love the last line of this quote. It taught me how to look at the assignments as learning skills, not just a good grade. And, as an instructor, isn't that what we all really want? We have a student who said, I knew what my grade would be. The element of surprise that other classes have was completely eliminated. That confidence was there. And we did have some critiques too. So we had this one student who said that they didn't really like where the pass was versus the high pass because it was a lot harder to get a high pass. They thought high pass should be worth even more points. That kind of speaks to not even realizing that the high pass was an A. And yes, the difference between roughly a C and an A, it is a lot more difficult, isn't it? But yeah, it is called a high pass for a reason there. What we learned was that the better the assignment expectations were, the clearer they were to the students, the more confident the students were going to be. We got strong work. We continue to get strong work from students no matter what they do. They are making decisions. They are self-regulating. The instructors say that there's so much less time spent on figuring out what the number is for the grade, and then they're totally focused on providing feedback, and they're enjoying providing feedback more. And they're getting a lot less of the begging and grade grubbing and grade complaints from students because they understand where their grades have come from. And we did have the students who struggled, and conceptually, like they just weren't clicking in because they've had years and years in a system that is grading them differently. And they would try to negotiate, why do I have to revise this if I missed this item for a high pass? Can't you just give me a partial grade? But the biggest thing I'd say is that we recognize the need for a cultural shift for everybody. And some of the instructors said like they initially wanted to give students those partial points because they felt worn down by just the one or two students who really wanted to argue for it. But when they felt more confident in the system as the semesters of using this wore on, they would hold the line on it and students would come around to the system pretty swiftly. Okay, some of the nuts and bolts stuff that you might be interested in. Setting up the grade book in Canvas. There are a lot of ways to do this, and it really depends on how you've set up your assignments. I tend to, if something's just going to be pass-fail, then I use the complete, incomplete on it, and I'll just put the point value in, so the numbers will add up at the end, but I'm just marking things complete and incomplete along the way. If I have levels of an assignment, I have done it before where I've asked students to submit to one of two submissions links, but sometimes that could be a little confusing for students. So I can say like, here's the full version and here's the concept version, or I create a rubric and it's not like your regular rubric. It doesn't have multiple levels of it. It just says it was a full version or concept version and the correct number of points are on it. So I just toggle that and click that, and that communicates to the students how I viewed their assignments, and you completed the concept version of it. Usually there is no mystery here, but I like to be very thorough and make sure that they understand what I saw there. I use the excused option to indicate if I've excused something via a token, like a small participation item, so it doesn't affect their grade in any way, but it's not marked as quite as if they did it. And I do mark the way that things happen with the tokens. So the way we set up tokens in Canvas is using the quiz function. They're worth 0 points, so it doesn't affect the grade book in any weird ways. But when the students submit a token, you get an alert that there's something there, that there's something to be graded. So for the quizzes, we set them up and we put them in a module, just call it the token module. It's got a page in it that gives a description of what the tokens are and how they work. And if it's a class that has tokens that are designated for different things, like you can only have 2 late assignments and you can only have 3 redos. I'm talking about an undergraduate level class. I don't need to give that many tokens with a graduate level class. And of course, it depends on the number of assignments, et cetera, that there are. But the tokens may be just general tokens and they click off what they're using them for in the quiz, or the one you see on the screen here, late assignment token, which assignment are you applying this to? And then the instructor or the TA can go through those. We mark the token off as used on the quiz. The quiz is completed out for the student. And then go to the grade book. I don't have to grade it in that moment, but I will go, or I'll have my TA go to the grade book and put a comment in on the assignment that says, token 2 applied for lateness. And that's our record keeping. So when I come back around to grade it, that comment is there on the assignment and I see that the token was used, and the student sees that the token was used as well. So they have confidence in that. Doesn't take much time at all. I often get questions about like, well, do students burn through all of the tokens that they get? So this is an example from end of term, part of the grade book from an undergraduate class. So the zeros that you see in there are the tokens that are used. As you look at it, you'll see that there are some students who did not use any tokens. We have token hoarders. right? People want to save those tokens in case they need them. And there's a student who burned through all of their tokens. And there are a lot of people where it's just a mix in between. You can create opportunities to earn extra tokens if you feel that it's necessary. If you're somebody who's given extra credit in the past, maybe you turn your extra credit opportunities into extra token opportunities. I don't like extra credit because I feel like that's somebody saying that this required thing wasn't important, so let me do something different instead. I'd rather give the student an extra chance to revise an assignment and do what they needed. That is a separate item, yes, a separate quiz for each possible token that is available in the course. But again, you set them so they're worth 0 and it doesn't mess anything up in the grade work. And I agree, the students who want the extra credit are the ones who don't do all the non-extra work. If you want to have some fun, you can create Easter egg tokens and hide them in there, and you're rewarding the people who really dive into the content. And you can have some way of triggering that token for them. Or, like when we went into the pandemic, everybody needed an extra break, didn't they? So guess what? An extra token for everybody. Why not? It was an easy thing to do. So if we're going through a rough time, you can just decide to do that. I already had this in here, but I also got a question about it. Like, how would bundling work? Bundling is when you make a decision about combinations of assignments that need to be done in order to earn a certain grade or outcome in the course. And this is from that master's level course I was telling you about that has the concept level and the full level assignments. And so I made some decisions about what an A should look like, what an A- should look like. Without spending too much time in the minutia of what the different assignments are on here, the participation and the blogs that the students keep in the class, I mean, that's like low level. They're both low level, continuous participation oriented things. And I thought, if you're going to get an A or A- in this class, I want you to do both of those. But sometimes I'd have students who are like, yeah, I don't want to do that one. Cool. Don't do that one. But that's going to drop your grade down to a B or a B+ level. The producage item on there, that's actually the final project for the course, and it could be done in levels. So there's a B level, a B+ level, which is adding something additional onto it, add something else for an A-, and you're getting increasingly complex in the way that you're addressing the learning objectives all the way to the end of the A, which adds a reflective critique where they go back over everything that they have designed and think about how they would do it better if they could do it again. This is, you're correct, Dina, to notice that this has some similarities to contract grading when you do bundling like this. The student is effectively deciding what grade they want to earn and making their decisions accordingly. For the graduate students I've used this with, they've found it very empowering. Some of them have said to me, I really wanted to be in this class. I had so many other responsibilities right now. I'm here for the learning, not for the grade. This really helps me because I don't want to get lower than a B. That would be bad for my GPA, but I can make a decision to get a B, and that's okay. A B- or lower, which of course a graduate student doesn't want, but if somebody decides to do the approach to the course, then there are points and there are calculations, and I explain that on the syllabus, and I can calculate a grade that's going to be a B- or lower if I need to for the course. You can also do mix and match for this. So this comes from a doctoral class that I teach. And this is one of those classes where I said I want them to do a lot of writing and I don't want it to be high stress. So there are a lot of smaller weekly assignments that are graded using the specs approach. And then there's a final portfolio, and that's graded based on points for 35% of the grade. So not everybody gets the same grade in the class, but every step along the way, if you're doing the work, you're getting the points for doing it. And it's a lot to do all of this work if you think about it, like each week to be turning something in. And if you're one of those perfectionists, there is so much stress around that. as an instructor, my thought is like, come on, just try this stuff. Show me you can do it. Show me you're thinking about this material. Let's stretch your brain. Let's stretch your skills. Let's keep practicing. And but I want to make it a safe place for you to do that, where you're not sitting there worrying about, oh, I lost half a point this week and a quarter of a point that week, and what is this going to mean for my final grade at the end? So again, it comes back to that control that the students have. And yeah, I really don't see plagiarism coming up. People don't feel the need to do that. And like the brief papers that I get, they vary in quality some weeks. Just sometimes students will still submit with the apologies and say, I don't think this one was quite as good. I had other things happening this week, or I don't think this one was quite as good. I just didn't connect with the content in quite the same way. That's okay. Actually, that's a great thing to know yourself in this instance. That's part of the learning experience too. So if you're converting, you need to think at the course level, like what's your existing grading scheme and what's important to you? You know, do I want students to complete all of the assignments, or can we do a subset of them? Do I have alignment in the first place? How do we demonstrate mastery in here? Do I want to have multiple attempts? Can I allow people to skip some small assignments, and is that okay? Choose what you want to convert to specs. And I recommend just trying it small if you're worried about this. Try it with a couple of minor assignments and see how your students react to it and see how you react to it. And then you can always roll it out, because the mixing and matching is all good here. You know, think about target grade scales for this. What should a C look like in here? And C is usually what puts people, if they drop below, on academic probation for undergrads, B for grads. So I usually use that as a benchmark of what's acceptable mastery for a minimum demonstration of achieving a target. If I'm doing it at the assignment level, then I'm going into, do I have a rubric? Do I know what I actually expect for this assignment? I'll think back to like, when students have done this in the past, what did they not do that I wanted? I'll think about whether or not there are specific objectives already articulated for the assignments, what guidance is there. I work on clarifying, even if I think I already had it done pretty well, I try to get it even better. And then if I'm doing leveled grading, I make a dividing line for meeting specifications for the regular passing level and the higher passing level. You may need to talk to your colleagues and administrators if you're thinking about trying this out. And all of the stuff that I've just talked about is what you want to tell people. And I just loaded this all onto a slide to make it easier. I know you all can get the slides afterwards and get a copy of the presentation, but just that idea that it's mastery and students are learning to follow directions. They're going to give you better work. You'll streamline grading, less of that grade grubbing. You put the time in up front and it gets easier later on. And yeah, we just start with some baby steps. When you communicate to students about it, you need to tell them about this at the beginning of the class. Remember, it's a big cultural change here. Remind them continuously with the assignments to follow the specs. Remind them if you send something back to them ungraded, or if they email you to ask permission for it to be late, because again, cultural change, right? Remind them that they've got the tokens for that, and give them enough tokens to learn without penalties. And so if you're running out of tokens and you're like, oh, I didn't design enough in, that's when you just say, oh, let's have more tokens in this class. And this is just a sample of how I explain it. Somebody did ask a question about that in advance, like how might you put this on a syllabus? What do you explain to students? And so I put it on the syllabus. I put it in writing in the LMS. I talk about it on the first day of class. I really want to make sure that my students fully understand what I'm doing with specs for them. And this brings me to my last bit, my resting point. These are frequently asked questions I get, and these were some questions that came up from all of you as well, and I can open to more questions you have here. You know, does everybody get an A? No, they don't. You know, I wondered that too. And I've looked at some of my grade distributions. I actually, I think my overall grade distributions tilt a little bit lower, because I've had people who I probably would have graded really kindly and given the benefit of the doubt before, who've just self-selected into lower option or decided to not do some of the assignments along the way because they feel really in control of that. I do think that in some instances, I see some of my A- pop up more to an A, but I'm still getting like the whole B range of grades. The undergrads were getting the whole C range and getting some F sometimes. But I think the A- sometimes tilt up to the A because the specs help those people. It helps them, really get that clarity on what was expected of them. They were the students who were already going to work for it. I've had people ask, like, would future employers care? It doesn't differentiate the grades if they're not meaningful. Well, I would think they should love this because it will tell you, not that I'm a softie with grading, but like, this is what students could do at the end, right? It just works. If you use specs, obviously you don't have to use it for everything in a course. You can use it for the components that you choose to use it from. And with tests, you can continue to use tests and for point values if you want, or you could do something like, set a threshold. Like if you're doing a bunch of little quizzes and you've got to get at least an 80% or something on the quizzes in order for them to count. So those are the questions I frequently get about this. I'm happy to continue to answer more questions. I see there's one in the chat about not devaluing the tokens by arbitrarily handing out more. And I agree with that. I actually don't arbitrarily hand out tokens. And true confession, we haven't actually adjusted the number of tokens in any classes since we started doing this, but we started with the idea that we could, because we didn't know if we had the right number of tokens or not. And I said, well, let's try this. If we've totally messed up on this and we're 3/4 of the way through the semester and we need more tokens, then all right, we'll give more tokens. And if not. And so we've just tracked it, looked at the data, and it seemed to work out pretty well. You get 1 or 2 students, you'll burn through the tokens, a large number of them that don't, especially at the graduate level. And it works pretty well. But during the pandemic, I did have a class where I gave everybody an extra token because they were just struggling so much with lateness and all the extra stuff that was happening. How many tokens are appropriate for a class? I make the determination based on the level of the class, how many assignments, and the kind of tokens that I want to give. With a graduate level class, I might just give tokens and tell them these are the things they can be used for, and you can decide how you want to apply the tokens. Like 3 usually is good for my graduate classes. The undergraduate class that I gave you as an example, they're just like so many moving parts to that class, and we wanted differentiated tokens. So we decided that they could have, 3 revise and resubmit tokens. And like, if you need more than 3 revise and resubmit tokens, then you're not learning to read the specifications, and that's a problem. We let the late ones be separate from that because, again, I think if you count up the number of items in the grade book for that class, all of the little participation oriented things and such, you are getting into like 60 little items. That's a lot. So they would have 7 tokens to start out with, but they can't use them all for the same thing. See, are there any other questions I can answer for anybody? Oh, hi, Kelly. Nice to see you. I do find this can be a really empowering way of teaching. If you embrace it and you encourage the students to embrace it, you can really, shift the mood around assignments in a class, and people will get excited about showing what they have learned how to do when there's less stress and when they're not sitting there worried about the grade. And I'll tell you another secret about it. This is, as somebody who I feel like I'm chronically overworked, and despite my best intentions and working long hours, there are times when I just don't get there to the grading as quickly as I would like to. And I find that people feel calmer about it because they know what the grade is going to be. there's really no mystery to that when they turned it in. And that bit of empowerment means that if it takes a little bit longer to get this more, just elaborative, interesting feedback, extending their thoughts, and we probably already had conversations about it in the class, that's okay. Yeah, that's like a token for a teacher. I've actually been known to say sometimes, all right, I got to take my token this week, folks, because it's a rough one. Well, thank you everybody for coming. And I am sharing my slides with Tom, and he can share them with all of you. And, please, my email's there. Don't hesitate to get in touch with me if you'd like to chat about this more.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Dennen. And thank you everyone for joining us. I am sharing a screen for the upcoming webinars in February and March. Please mark your calendar and watch the announcement. I will send the latest webinar invitations to the IDN listserv pretty soon. Please feel free to subscribe to the IDN listserv. And thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful afternoon.